Jesus' famous question and this whole event took place in Caesarea Philippi, as it said, and it's a really unique place. Caesarea Philippi is way up in the northern part of the Holy Land, very close to the Golan Heights, which has always been a very contested military area in the Middle East, as that entire region is contested, but the Golan Heights has a particular military advantage, and so that's why many of these countries keep fighting over who has it. And so Caesarea Philippi is very close, and even at the time of Jesus, it was still a very hot area that had a lot of conflict. And so the actual city of Caesarea, which is now a pile of rocks like most of the ancient sites in the Holy Land, but at the time it would have been a bustling city, and because of all the different groups that were trying to own it, you had a lot of different gods present there. So the Greeks were there for a time, and there were ruins of Greek pagan gods. The Romans obviously had it at the time of Jesus, and so the Roman pagan gods were there. There were also some other ancient gods. One of the more famous ones is the god Pan, who is known to their followers had human sacrifices. And even today, hopefully, when tourism is up bustling again in the Holy Land, you go to Caesarea Philippi today, they have the altar to Pan where they would kill people and offer those sacrifices. And so it's a unique place for Jesus to ask this question because he's surrounded by all of these other options of gods to worship, right? And even the answers that are given, and we can't go too much into it, but basically the disciples aren't saying, people say you're like John the Baptist or you're like Elijah. He's saying, who do people say that I am? You are John the Baptist, as if some kind of reincarnation or a reincarnation of Elijah. These are things the Jews didn't believe in and still don't, right? And so, like, they're allowing their minds and the place that they're in to start kind of thinking of in ways of other religions and theologies, right? And so as Jesus is now in the midst of this, and he's asking them, who do you say that I am? There are clearly other options. There's only one right option. There's only one way, truth, and life, right? And that's him. But among all of these options, all the different things that the world will lead you to believe, who do you say that I am? And that's still a great question for us today. Who is God to us? Is God a medicine man that we go to when we feel ill, or if a friend or family member has received a bad diagnosis? Is God a type of handyman that we call on to fix our problems? Is God a different type of Santa Claus that we only go to him when we want something, or we think we need something, or maybe we actually need something? Do we believe that God is some type of big punching bag in the sky, or a scapegoat to blame all of my problems on? Do we really believe God exists at all? Or are we just kind of going through the motion? Who do you say that I am? So ultimately, God is love, right? Now we can use God go to God for all these things, right? God does want to heal us. God wants us to be joyful. God wants us to have a happy life. He desires us to be with him forever in the fullness of joy in the kingdom of heaven, right? But now, do we just use God for those things, and we really just want it our way, not his way? But ultimately, we need to see God as love, the fullness of love, in fact. And we see the fullness of his love in what he prepares his disciples for, which is his crucifixion. That is perfect love. That is what we are called to mimic at all times. That's the love that God has for us. And it involves suffering. It involves feelings of helplessness. It involves things that the world tries to convince us is not good, will not bring us happiness, things that we should be avoiding. It makes the world wants us to put God into a box of either this handyman or medicine man or Santa Claus or whatever. But God is bigger than all of those things. God is love. And he wants us to always know he's with us in the midst of our suffering, which is why he's preparing the disciples as well. Like, not only will I suffer, but you will suffer too and take up your own cross, and that will be the way to heaven, right? Sometimes it's hard to kind of think through all these things, but in our own lives, we have our own examples, right? For me, my best friend died when we were 23 years old. He had cancer. And I remember the New Year's Eve before he died, we were in his hospital room. It was him in his bed, and 3 of us there spending New Year's Eve with him. And it was awkward. We knew he was not long for this world. There was nothing we could do. The nurses were helping manage his pain, but we couldn't take away his cancer. We couldn't change the course, this trajectory that his body was on. And so helplessly, we sat there trying to celebrate a new year, trying to look forward to things to come, but awkward because he wouldn't have the rest of the year on this earth. But in the midst of being there, he was just so comforted by our helpless presence. And that's how God desires to be in relationship with us. God can't just change the course of history, right? We all have free will. If people do something bad toward me, God can't stop them from making their free choice. In terms of how the world just kind of works, God allows a lot of things to happen. But God, while he doesn't mind being that big punching bag or scapegoat, he's sitting there with us. As we feel helpless and alone, he's with us in the room of our heart, helping us carry our cross. And the evil one will make us believe the lie that God doesn't love me and God is punishing me and God is blah, blah, blah. Those are all lies. We gotta just ignore them and hold on to the truth of what we know, that the Lord allows us to pick up our crosses, and he is there with us in the midst of our suffering, not allowing us to be alone. One last note on Peter. Peter, who I love, because he gets it right and then he gets it wrong immediately after. But see, Peter loves Jesus so much he doesn't want him to suffer. Just like any of us, we don't want to see our friends suffer. And the world teaches us how to avoid suffering. The world wants us to always be comfortable, because in that comfortableness, then we don't experience the cross. That was very uncomfortable. And that's what discipleship looks like. It's uncomfortable. But it's that uncomfortableness that makes us into the great saints that we desire to be. There's no saint in our entire tradition who lived a comfortable life. Every saint, even from the rich boy of Pier Giorgio Frassati, had polio and worked with the poor and was very uncomfortable. To saints like Francis of Assisi with his stigmata, very uncomfortable. But that is the way to heaven. And Peter starts to follow the way of the world led by Satan and tries to avoid Jesus' suffering. But it's inevitable. We have to do it with the Lord, who is not abandoning us. He is walking with us. My friends, we are called to be uncomfortable with Christ crucified, so that we can spend eternity in the great comfort that is the kingdom of heaven.